They say people never forget how you made them feel. That night at the Metropolitan Museum, I finally understood why. It was our 8th anniversary, and the Temple of Dendur glowed with ethereal lighting that transformed the ancient stones into something magical. The charity gala I had organised was raising funds for children's legal advocacy, and the name cards bore the elegant script of a cause I believed in deeply. The champagne was Dom Perignon. The string quartet played Clair de Lune beside the sacred pool. I wore the same perfume I did on our wedding day, and Marcus. Marcus wore the same calculating smile he always did when networking with Manhattan's elite. 150 guests, all from the legal community and philanthropic circles, turned their attention as my husband. My successful husband raised his glass and tapped it gently. To justice, to family, to 8 incredible years, someone whispered expectantly at a nearby table. Marcus cleared his throat. "Thank you for joining us tonight," he began, his voice polished from years of boardroom presentations. 8 years of marriage is a testament to endurance, and I think it's time I was completely honest. His voice dropped. People leaned forward, mistaking his pause for emotion. He looked directly at me and smirked. "Eleanor, you've been nothing but a disappointment since our wedding night." A champagne flute slipped from someone's grasp. There was a collective gasp. My mother pressed her hand to her chest. Someone laughed nervously. Marcus stood taller, feeding off the shock rippling through the crowd. 8 years I've endured this frigid, pretentious charade, played the role of a devoted husband. But tonight I'm finished with the performance. He never completed that thought because I stood up, smoothed the silk of my midnight blue gown, and turned calmly to the AV technician positioned near the ancient temple. I gave him the signal we had rehearsed. The lights dimmed. The projection screen behind the musicians flickered to life. The strings stopped mid-phrase, their final note hanging in the air like incense. "What the hell is this?" Marcus muttered. His glass shook slightly in his grip. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The screen flickered, then faded to black, and in gold serif letters it read, 8 years of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A soft melody began, our first dance song. The opening frame showed me in my wedding dress, spinning in slow motion, smiling at a man I thought I loved, and Marcus staring back, his expression unreadable even then. The room fell silent. I could feel the tension coiling like a spring. There were whispers behind me. Is this their wedding video? Is this part of the program? My hands remained steady at my sides, my jaw set with determination. I watched the screen as if it weren't my life being dissected in front of 150 frozen stares. Marcus's face drained of colour. "Eleanor, what is this?" he asked again, his voice rising. I didn't acknowledge him. Instead, I let the next chapter of our carefully constructed lie unfold for all to witness. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that this wasn't just a retrospective. It was evidence, and we were just beginning. 3 days before the anniversary gala, I had returned home early from court with a splitting headache. That morning had started routinely coffee in our penthouse kitchen overlooking Central Park, Sophia heading off to her private school, Marcus halfway through a conference call with his executive team. I told him I wasn't feeling well, and he barely glanced up from his laptop. "Go rest," he mumbled, scrolling through emails. I returned around noon. The penthouse felt eerily quiet, as if it were holding secrets. I headed straight to our bedroom, kicked off my Italian heels, and was about to collapse onto the bed when I noticed it Marcus's phone sitting on the nightstand, unlocked, abandoned, and completely out of character for him. Marcus never left his phone unattended. He guarded it like classified information. I stared at it for several long seconds. Then I picked it up. The screen illuminated instantly. A new message preview flashed across the top. "Can't wait to try on the new lingerie." "You said red was your favorite." The sender's name read Mi Amor. My throat constricted. I hesitated, then, with hands that had cross-examined countless witnesses, I unlocked it. Sophia's birthday, Marcus never bothered to change his passcode. The text thread opened into a minefield of betrayal photos, messages, voice notes, all from Jessica Rivera, his 26-year-old marketing director. "I hate pretending you're just my colleague," she wrote. "I hate watching you go home to her every night." "Just 3 more days," Marcus replied in one message. "Let her have her anniversary moment. The second it's over, I'm done with this marriage." Another message followed. "Don't worry about the prenup. My lawyer says if I wait until after the anniversary, I can claim half of everything." Half. My practice, my trust fund, my daughter's future. I sank onto the edge of the bed. The phone clutched in my hand like burning evidence. The photographs Marcus and Jessica at the St. Regis in his corner office after hours, one of them wearing what I recognized as my silk robe. I didn't cry, not then. I just felt something inside me harden, like a gavel coming down in a courtroom I didn't realize I was presiding over. The next morning, I met someone for coffee. Not a colleague, not another attorney, a man named David Chen, a former FBI cybersecurity specialist turned private security consultant. We'd met years ago when he helped my law firm expose a major corporate espionage case. I told him everything methodically, precisely, like presenting opening arguments. He listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. "So, what exactly do you want from me?" he asked finally, pen poised over his notepad. I looked him directly in the eye and said, "I want documentation. I want financial records. I want photographs, locations, communications, everything that will hold up in court." He leaned back, tapping his pen against the marble table. "That'll be expensive," he said. "Money is not a concern," I replied. "This isn't just about divorce proceedings. This is about professional accountability. I want the legal community to see what he really is." David raised an eyebrow. "And what's your ultimate objective, Elena?" I stirred my coffee once, twice, and smiled for the first time in days. "A celebration that will redefine his career." It only took David 3 days. 3 days to dismantle the illusion I had spent 8 years believing in. He delivered the files in a secure leather portfolio. No digital copies, no email trails. He understood the gravity of what we were dealing with. I opened it in my home office, the soft classical music playing in the background suddenly feeling too peaceful, too naive. The first page contained a photograph Marcus, 8 years younger, standing outside a failing tech startup in Silicon Valley. Beside him, a bankruptcy notice posted on the glass door. That was 2 months before our wedding. The next page detailed a timeline. His company had collapsed in the spring of that year. 3 weeks later, he had begun pursuing me. I turned to the next section: phone records, bank statements, social media forensics. Marcus hadn't simply fallen in love with me. He had strategically targeted me. My family name, Castellanos, commanded respect in Manhattan's legal circles. We didn't just practice law, we shaped it. And Marcus had researched that thoroughly. He hadn't courted me for love. He had courted me for access. He had introduced himself at a legal symposium my father had keynoted, pretending it was serendipity. He had studied my publications, mirrored my judicial philosophy, positioned himself in every professional space I occupied. Every interaction had been calculated. By the time he proposed, the managing partners at my firm were already considering him for a senior position. He had played the long game, and I had been the ultimate prize. One page in the file showed an email Marcus had written to his former Stanford roommate. "Marrying Elena isn't just a victory, it's a strategic acquisition. Once her father retires from the bench, I'll be positioned to leverage the family influence. She's too idealistic to see the manipulation." I stared at that sentence until the words became meaningless. She's too idealistic to see the manipulation. He'd been wrong about many things, but that was his most costly miscalculation. I closed the portfolio slowly, my hands steady with purpose. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated assault on everything I valued. He had studied me like a legal brief, crafted a strategy, executed it flawlessly. But now the case was mine to argue. I called David back that same evening. "I need another favor," I said. "I want you to help me document something." He hesitated. "What kind of documentation?" I looked out the window where the city sparkled beneath me like a constellation of possibilities. "A deposition," I said. "Only this time the truth will be admissible." The following week, I told Marcus I had an idea. "Let's create a video for Sophia," I said gently, brushing my fingers across his expensive suit sleeve at dinner. "For our 8th anniversary, something she can treasure when she's older." He raised an eyebrow with interest. "A documentary of sorts, something like that," I said. "Us discussing our marriage, our family, our journey to this point." He smiled, arrogant as always, already envisioning the public relations value. "Brilliant," I whispered. "Exactly." He never questioned why the camera equipment looked so professional. He never asked about the sound engineer's background in courtroom recording. And he certainly never noticed that Sophia wasn't home anymore. I had already arranged for her to stay at my parents' estate in Connecticut, safely removed from the storm I was about to unleash. The morning of the anniversary gala, I stood before the mirror in my dressing suite at the museum and practiced my expression. Not the diplomatic smile I used in settlement negotiations. Not the proud smile I reserved for Sophia's school presentations. This was different. This was the expression of a woman who had finally stopped underestimating herself, stopped trusting blindly, stopped accepting less than she deserved. The expression of a woman who knew exactly what justice looked like. I touched up my lipstick and adjusted my gown. The stylist hovered nearby, making final adjustments to the hem. "You look absolutely luminous," she said. I nodded, not really processing her words. Somewhere below us, the Temple of Dendur was being transformed elegantly printed programs. White orchids and baby's breath, ice sculptures bearing the scales of justice. Everything Marcus had ever wanted. Everything he believed was still within his grasp. When I entered the reception area, Marcus was already there, sipping champagne with Jessica. Of course he had brought her. I had specifically requested it. "She's an integral part of your team," I had said innocently. It would be inappropriate to exclude her. Jessica wore a scarlet dress, too revealing for a charity function. She clung to his arm possessively. They looked rehearsed, as if they had choreographed their deception. I didn't flinch. I greeted them with professional courtesy. "I'm so glad you could make it," I said warmly. Jessica's eyes widened slightly. Marcus studied my face intently. "You seem different tonight," he said slowly. "Liberated," I replied. "It must be the lighting." We proceeded to the head table. My parents sat nearby, my mother giving me a questioning look. She had sensed the change in me. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough to remain silent. Sophia wasn't there naturally. I had told everyone she was spending the weekend with her grandparents. I didn't want her to witness what was coming. Not yet. The pianist began to play and Marcus stood for his toast. The same polished speech he always delivered, just refined for this audience. Except this time he couldn't finish it because the lights dimmed. The projection screen illuminated and the video began. Not the sentimental montage he anticipated, but the first exhibit in the case against him. The guests turned in their seats. Marcus froze mid-sentence. On screen, he appeared 8 years younger, sitting in a cheap suit, laughing into the camera. "Of course I married her," he said. "You think I'd pass up a Castellanos?" Laughter, clinking glasses. A younger Marcus continued her father's practically royalty in Manhattan legal circles. "She's brilliant but naive. The kind of woman who signs without reading the fine print." The room fell completely silent. Someone gasped audibly. Someone else dropped their fork with a clatter. Marcus's face contorted with rage. "Eleanor, shut it off," he growled. But I remained seated, eyes fixed on the screen. "This is your moment, darling," I said quietly. "Enjoy the attention." The clip ended. A new one began. This time, hotel security footage. Marcus and Jessica. Their intimate conversation in the lobby. A stolen kiss in the elevator. The timestamp, last Tuesday, hours after he told me he was in Chicago for a conference. His lies weren't just exposed, they were preserved for posterity. He reached for something to stop the presentation. There was nothing within reach because I controlled every aspect of this evening. The video faded to black. For a moment, the Temple of Dendur was suspended in that profound, echoing silence where shame has nowhere to hide. Then the screen illuminated again, this time with softer lighting a child's bedroom, evening shadows, and Sophia sitting cross-legged on her bed, holding a stuffed fox in her arms. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming home?" she asked the camera. My voice off-screen responded gently. "He's working late again tonight, sweetheart." Sophia's face fell. "He's always working late. Does he not want to be with us anymore?" There was no script, no editing. Just truth captured in a moment I had once tried to rationalize away. Gasps rippled through the audience. I saw my mother turn away, one hand pressed to her heart. Marcus stared in horror, trapped in his own unraveling. And then the sound of Sophia crying, soft at first, then breaking into heartbroken sobs as she whispered, "Did I make Daddy not love us anymore?" The video froze on that frame her tear-streaked face. The room was silent except for someone weeping near the back. Maybe it was Jessica. Maybe it was me. I couldn't distinguish anymore. Marcus pushed his chair back violently, chest heaving. "This is unconscionable," he snarled. "You're exploiting our daughter. Stop," I said, rising now, voice controlled but razor-sharp. "Don't you dare invoke her name like she's merely evidence in your defense. She's the only reason I showed you any mercy at all." He tried to speak, but I raised my hand, and the final clip began playing. It was Marcus again, this time in an upscale office, speaking quietly into his phone. "No, she'll never see it coming," he said. "Once the paperwork is filed, I'll freeze the joint accounts. She's too busy playing supermom to notice the financial maneuvering. I didn't need to provide commentary. The evidence spoke for itself. I walked slowly to the center of the room, stopping directly beside him. You said you married me for strategic advantage, I said. But what you never understood was that my legacy isn't inherited, it's earned. It comes from knowing when to negotiate and when to litigate. I reached into my clutch and extracted a single envelope, thick and official. I handed it to him without hesitation. These are divorce papers? My attorneys have already secured restraining orders on all marital assets. Your access is terminated. The penthouse mine. The account's frozen. Your firm, they've seen the footage. Marcus looked down at the envelope as if it contained a death sentence. You can't do this to me, he said, voice barely audible. You need me. I leaned in just close enough for only him to hear. You were right about one thing, I whispered. I was too idealistic, but idealism isn't naivety, it's having standards. And tonight, I'm enforcing them. He collapsed into his chair, defeated, eyes darting desperately around the room. No one met his gaze, not even Jessica. Especially not Jessica, who was quietly retreating toward the exit, her face pale as the museum's marble walls. I returned to my seat, lifted my glass. To truth, I said simply, and drank. I thought the worst had passed, that exposing Marcus in front of our colleagues, our families, and the legal luminaries who once sought his counsel would be the final verdict in this trial of betrayal. But I was wrong. The room hadn't fully processed what had just transpired when someone stood up a man I hadn't seen in years. Thomas Brooks, the senior partner at my father's old firm, my father's closest friend, Marcus's former mentor. His presence alone commanded attention. He'd flown in from Washington, D.C. that morning, unannounced and unexpected. But it was what he held in his hand that made me pause. A small leather portfolio, deep blue with gold embossing. He cleared his throat. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, he began, voice steady but authoritative. But having witnessed the truth finally emerge, perhaps it's time we conclude what Eleanor has begun. Marcus stiffened visibly. Thomas looked directly at him. You didn't just lie to your wife, Marcus. You lied to us, to the firm, to the bar association. You signed conflict of interest disclosures, swore under oath that your relationship with Jessica Rivera was strictly professional. He opened the portfolio. We discovered a paper trail her promotion, her compensation package, the unauthorized transfer of client confidential information. Marcus stood shakily. You can't accuse me of sit down, Thomas commanded, his voice carrying through the space like a judge's gavel. You're not being accused, you're being disbarred. There was a murmur of shocked voices throughout the room. Thomas turned to me. Eleanor, your father always said you were the only attorney in the family with both brilliance and integrity. It's time we let you demonstrate it. He placed the portfolio before me. These are partnership documents. Your name is on them now. My hands remained steady. Not this time. I opened the folder and signed with a single confident signature. It felt like reclaiming a part of my professional identity I hadn't realized I'd compromised. Marcus remained frozen beside his seat. I looked at him and said, now justice has been served. But the evening wasn't finished with him, because just as the guests began to stir, preparing to leave this wreckage behind, a uniformed officer entered through the side entrance. Another followed, then two more. The guests parted respectfully. Marcus Rivera Castellanos, one officer said, you need to come with us. Marcus laughed bitterly, desperately. For what? A failed marriage? The officer remained professional. Securities fraud. Insider trading. Misappropriation of client funds. A moment later, they placed him in handcuffs right there in front of everyone he had once impressed, charmed, and deceived. Jessica gasped. Wait, what? No, this can't be, but no one was listening. Not to her. Not to him. The Temple of Dendur emptied slowly, some people whispering, others departing in contemplative silence. The string quartet never resumed playing. The ice sculptures began to melt. The gala had ended, but something far more significant had begun. I stood quietly at the center of it all, feeling the weight of every decision that had brought me to this moment. And then I turned and walked away with dignity intact. In the days that followed, the silence I expected never materialized. Weeks passed, but the storm only intensified. I thought the next morning would bring peace, like the calm after a legal victory. But instead it was more turbulent than the gala had ever been. My phone buzzed constantly, news alerts, missed calls, bar association members, journalists, even distant law school classmates who'd never maintained contact. Every headline screamed variations of the same story. Prominent attorney exposes husband's fraud at charity gala. Legal community rocked by insider trading scandal. Betrayal in the Temple of Justice. By noon I had a headache that no medication could alleviate. I stood at the kitchen counter of my parents' townhouse in Connecticut, stirring tea I wouldn't drink while Sophia played upstairs with my mother. She didn't know the complete story yet, just that Mommy and Daddy were going to be living in separate homes and that she'd be staying with Grandma for a while. When she asked why, I'd simply said, because sometimes adults need time to solve complicated problems. She nodded, then asked if her stuffed fox could stay with her. That was what broke my composure. Not the headlines, not the photographs, not even the footage replaying on legal news programs. It was her innocence still protected. Around 3, I finally watched the television coverage. There it was Marcus's arrest, replayed endlessly, interspersed with clips of me toasting to truth and that grainy hotel surveillance footage of him with Jessica. His attorney had released a statement, some feeble defense about manipulated evidence and personal vendettas. It was irrelevant. The documentation was too comprehensive. The damage was too extensive. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. I wasn't certain if I felt satisfaction or something more profound like vindication. A knock on the front door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find David Chen in his usual professional attire, holding a manila envelope. "Told you I deliver results," he said. I smiled, stepped aside, and invited him in. He placed the envelope on the coffee table. "Final report," he said. "Financial analysis, travel records, some offshore accounts that violate federal banking regulations." I sat across from him, arms crossed. "Will that assist the SEC investigation?" "They've already opened a formal case," he said. "You might have your day in federal court, possibly multiple days." I looked out the window where the trees had begun their autumn transformation. Fall had always been my father's favorite season. "Do you ever tire of watching people's careers implode?" I asked. David chuckled softly. "Not really, but I do appreciate seeing someone finally control the narrative." He stood, preparing to leave. "One more thing," he added. "I discovered something unusual. You should review the report's final section, page 42. Then he was gone. No explanation. Just that cryptic directive. I waited until Sophia was asleep, waited until the house was completely quiet. Then I opened the envelope, skipped past the names, the numbers, the photographs, until I found it page 42. And that's when I discovered it, a scanned copy of a letter dated 2 years before our wedding. Written by Marcus, addressed to someone named Amanda Wells. The subject line, prenuptial strategy consultation. My blood turned cold. I stared at the document long after the words lost meaning. Amanda Wells. The name wasn't foreign to me. In fact, it was painfully familiar. She'd been part of my professional world once, peripheral but always present. She worked in my father's corporate law division. A sharp, polished woman who never lingered at firm events, but always seemed to possess information before anyone else. She had a quiet authority about her, the kind that could conceal daggers behind diplomacy. When Marcus and I were newly engaged, she had handled our prenuptial agreement. I barely paid attention then, too busy planning centerpieces, selecting venues and imagining a perfect future. But the letter David had uncovered wasn't professional correspondence. It was personal, intimate. It opened with "Dearest Amanda" and closed with "Yours in partnership, M." In it, Marcus detailed a plan, cold, clinical, strategic. He outlined how marrying into the Castellanos name would secure access to confidential client information, how he would keep Elena satisfied long enough to gain signature authority on major accounts. He even referenced our future child. One heir will cement the arrangement. After that, we reassess. I dropped the paper. My hands were trembling. I hadn't just been betrayed by a husband. I had been manipulated by an entire conspiracy. Amanda had collaborated with him. She'd sat across from me in conference rooms, shaken my hand with manicured fingers, and looked me in the eye while orchestrating my exploitation. For a brief moment, I couldn't breathe. My entire marriage, my entire motherhood, had been constructed on a foundation they had engineered. The next morning, I met David again at a cafe on the Upper East Side, away from cameras and whispers. I slid the letter across the table. "What do you know about her?" He didn't even blink. "Amanda Wells, former corporate counsel, left your father's firm 6 months after your wedding. Currently serves on the board of a hedge fund managed by, guess who?" "Jessica Rivera," I said through clenched teeth. "Exactly," he replied. Turns out Marcus was never operating alone. Jessica was the distraction. Amanda was the architect. I felt nauseous. Do you think my father knew? David looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. Your father was many things but naive about betrayal. Never. My assessment, he suspected something. That's why he restructured the voting shares before he passed. Why he never fully granted Marcus partnership status. I leaned back in my chair, the noise of the cafe fading beneath the weight of that revelation. My father had tried to protect me, but he couldn't prevent the storm, only prepare me to weather it. I pulled out my phone and opened the firm's directory. Amanda's name was still listed. I hovered my finger over her contact information, then paused. No, not yet, I said. There's one more piece of evidence I need first. I turned to David. Can you locate her tonight? He nodded slowly. You want a confrontation? No, I said. I want witnesses. Somewhere public. Somewhere she can't escape accountability. My voice didn't waver this time. She helped architect the deception. It's only appropriate she hears the truth from me. It took less than 48 hours for the perfect opportunity to present itself. The Women's Bar Association was hosting its Autumn Awards dinner, a black-tie affair where the city's most accomplished female attorneys gathered under the crystal chandeliers of the historic plaza. I had always declined the invitation previously, content to let others take center stage while I supported from behind the scenes. But this year was different. This year, I had testimony to deliver. I ensured Amanda Wells's name was on the guest list, and not just as an attendee. She was scheduled as a keynote speaker on ethical standards in corporate law. The irony was almost laughable. David helped secure me a speaking opportunity. It wasn't difficult. The media attention surrounding the legal scandal had made me something of a symbol. They called me the Phoenix lawyer in one article, the attorney who fought back in another. I didn't care about the publicity. I cared that Amanda would be there and that she wouldn't anticipate what was coming. The night of the dinner, I wore navy silk, understated, elegant, professional armor. I arrived deliberately late, just as the main course was being served. Conversations quieted when I entered. Faces turned. Some nodded with sympathy, others with curiosity, but I wasn't acknowledging them. I was searching for the corner table near the podium. Amanda sat alone reviewing her notes, her expression carefully neutral. She hadn't changed, still immaculate, still calculating. The event coordinator greeted me warmly, directed me to take my place on the program. I walked slowly, confidently, each step against the marble floor a quiet declaration of intent. Amanda finally looked up. Our eyes met for just a second, just long enough. She blinked, straightened her posture, but I had already gained the advantage. I took the podium. Good evening, I began, voice steady and clear. When I was first invited to speak tonight, I wasn't certain I belonged here. After all, for years I allowed other people to shape my professional narrative. My marriage, my silence. But recent events have taught me something crucial, that being a woman-in-law doesn't just mean holding a degree. It means holding others accountable, especially when the foundation beneath you was designed to crumble. Amanda's pen stopped moving. The room held its collective breath. I was married to a man who promised partnership while planning my professional destruction before we even exchanged vows. He didn't work alone. He had assistants, legal assistants, trusted assistants. My voice sharpened. But you see, the thing about trust in our profession is, it's loudest when it's violated. And in my case, it was violated so publicly the entire legal community heard. There was a murmur of understanding, a shifting of attention. Amanda's face had lost its color. She reached for her water glass with a hand that trembled slightly. I looked directly at her. To those who sit beside us and plan our downfall, to those who draft our contracts while erasing our dignity, we see you now. And seeing is the first step to justice. I concluded the speech with a quiet thank you. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was sharp, controlled, precise, like a jury's verdict. I didn't linger after the speech. I didn't need to. The silence on Amanda's face was testimony enough. The dinner continued around her, but she never approached me. Never said a word, just sat there, brittle behind a glass of untouched wine. I left the plaza without looking back, stepped into the cool night air and finally exhaled completely. The next morning, I received a call from James, my father's former law partner. There's something I need to show you, he said, his voice unusually tense. Something your father left behind. My stomach clenched. Left behind where? In the vault. The one beneath his old office at the firm. I hadn't been there since the funeral. Not since the partners gathered and Marcus pretended to grieve while quietly positioning for control. But now I held the keys. And I wasn't just entering that office as a daughter. I was entering as a senior partner. The vault was colder than I remembered: steel walls, dust-covered shelves. James led me to a security deposit box labeled only with a single initial E. Inside was a small leather box, and within it an envelope sealed, dated 6 months before my wedding. The handwriting was unmistakably my father's. Eleanor, if you're reading this, then something I feared has occurred. I suspected Marcus wasn't who he claimed to be. I didn't know how extensive the manipulation was, but I observed enough. Enough to take precautions. Enough to prepare you. You'll find enclosed 2 items first. The complete breakdown of the prenuptial agreement I secretly revised. One you never signed, but he did. It voids his claims to your inheritance. And second, the name of the person who helped me uncover his true intentions. I paused, heart racing. Inside the envelope was a document folded with surgical precision. The prenup, ironclad, crystal clear. And stapled to the back a business card. David Chen, Security Consulting. I laughed out loud, alone in that vault. You brilliant man, I whispered. You knew everything. It hadn't been coincidence that David found his way to me. My father had arranged it years ago. Had left behind a trail of protection disguised as distance. I blinked back tears. All this time I thought I'd been facing the fire alone, but my father had already constructed the firewall. As I drove home, I thought of Sophia, of the woman I was becoming for her, of the legacy I wanted her to inherit. Not money, not property, but the unshakable conviction that integrity was worth defending, and that silence wasn't synonymous with strength. It was time to complete the circle. I sat down at my desk that evening and began to write. Not a legal brief, not a press release, a letter. One my daughter would read someday. One that would begin simply, Sophia, here's what your father did. And here's how we rose above it. The weeks that followed were anything but peaceful. The media storm didn't subside, it evolved. Marcus's face was everywhere, now framed in courtroom sketches and news tickers that read, "Former COO indicted." Jessica disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated of her resignation, of a plea agreement, of panic. Amanda quietly resigned from every board position she held, citing personal reasons. I never heard from her again. I didn't need to. Some conclusions don't require confrontation, just exposure. But closure, true closure, isn't the absence of noise. It's what you hear when the noise finally fades. Eventually, I found us a new home downtown, a quiet apartment with expansive windows and no ghosts from the past. For me, it was the sound of Sophia's laughter echoing through our new apartment. It was the silence between emails from the firm, not tension, but trust. It was the first time I stood in my father's old office, looked out the windows he once did, and didn't feel like an imposter. One rainy afternoon, David dropped by unannounced, holding a white envelope. "Final piece of the puzzle," he said. "It's from a source inside the DA's office. They wanted you to have it." Inside was a copy of Marcus's police statement, not for public release. Just one line stood out. I thought I could manipulate her. I never thought she'd fight back with such precision. I folded it, slid it into the back of my journal. That's all it was now. A footnote in the story of a man who underestimated the wrong attorney. There would be court proceedings, depositions, years of legal cleanup. But emotionally, spiritually, I was already complete. I spent a Saturday morning helping Sophia paint a mural on her bedroom wall, foxes and forests and stars. She asked if she could invite Grandma to see it. "Of course," I said. My mother had grown quieter lately, less critical, more present. Maybe she saw now what she hadn't seen before. Or maybe losing the illusion of Marcus had finally opened her eyes. Either way, the past didn't carry as much weight as it once did. A few days later, I returned to the plaza not for revenge. Not for spectacle, but for a small charity dinner. One of the organizers approached me and whispered, "You know, they're still discussing that speech you gave. The one where you didn't name names, but everyone understood anyway." I smiled professionally. "That wasn't a speech," I said. "That was an opening statement." And it was. The opening statement of a life not defined by betrayal, but by restoration. Of a woman not broken by deception, but strengthened by it. Of a daughter who finally understood the depth of her father's protection. And a mother who would teach her own child what legacy truly meant. As I walked home that night under a quiet sky, the city lights reflecting in puddles at my feet, I realized something justice isn't always loud. But healing resonates through generations. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply this: you get to live authentically while they drown in the ruins they constructed for you. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. Your response to it does. I used to think strength meant remaining silent, enduring, not creating conflict. But now I know real strength is speaking up, walking away and rebuilding on your own terms. Sometimes the people closest to us will weaponize our trust. They'll test the limits of our love, confuse loyalty with submission, and assume we'll always choose peace over truth. But we don't owe anyone our silence, especially not those who tried to erase us. To anyone listening who's been deceived, underestimated, or made to feel powerless, you're not alone. You are not weak for believing the best in people, but you are powerful for choosing yourself when they stop deserving your trust. Revenge doesn't always come with drama or spectacle. Sometimes it looks like peace, like dignity, like success that no one can steal. And the quiet confidence of knowing you survived and emerged stronger. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you'd never be and doing it without them.